Hi, what do you think about God and about Moses? You know, they were really good friends. It says in chapter 34 that he's his only intimate friend. Now, why do you think that Moses, as good as he was and as all he did, he brought those people out of slavery, and he stayed on a mountaintop with God for 40 days and 40 nights, writing down notes about what God wanted him to do. Why would God, or do you really think that God really would turn to Moses and not let him go to the promised land because of what he did? That was, you wonder, what was so bad? What was the terrible thing that he did? Well, it has to do with how we read the Bible. Now, there are two kinds of ways to read the Bible. More than that, probably, but at least two. And the two are this that I'm thinking about for right now, and that I'm going to discuss with you and have you to think about now. Sometimes you're going to be thinking about this when you would have never thought before, and maybe you're not going to even like it. but we're just going to talk about what's in the Bible, not what anybody's been told that's in the Bible, but what's there. And we're going to go over it together. So we got two different ways of reading this. One of them is that it's literal. That is, what we read in that Bible is what has come right off God's lips. Now, we've said this several times, so you're going to know, and the more you hear it, maybe the better it is. But we know when we have people thinking, well, it comes right off God's lips onto these pages, but the Bibles don't always add up one to another either way, anyway. And also, when people have done this, it has been disastrous. We have 40,000 different denominations, and it's because they are reading literally what they see, but what they're reading is just the part that fits what they want to believe. So they're not really coming to read the Bible to see what to believe. They've got their belief made up. They've already got their dogma, and now they're coming looking for data. And there's one group that says, no, there's a better way to look at it, or there's a different way anyhow. So I'm going to talk about one different way that's not about God speaking these words right onto these pages. So it happens this way. We've got the ones that we call literalists that read the Bible word for word. Then there is another group that is not nearly as popular, but they're called the scholars. Now, the scholars might be in some denomination. They might be not even believers, but they're not trying to disprove the Bible. What they're trying to do is to understand it and to read what is there. Not what somebody tells them, not what you want to believe, but what is actually there. So we're going to read today about what is actually there. And I know you've heard this before, so let's just go on now. Let's go to chapter 17. And I'd like for you to do this, if you can. If you've got two Bibles, that'd be good. That'd be the best way. If you don't, if you got one Bible, try at least to get a bookmark and put in, or starting at chapter 17, put a bookmark there as we read. And then we're going to go to another place in it. Maybe have two bookmarks would be good. And the other bookmark is going to be in Numbers chapter 20, verse 1. So let's look now and see what we've got. If we can look at both of those at the same time, you could have two Bibles, or you can stop this anytime you want to and check with one Bible and then check another and then turn it back on, and then you'll probably want to go back and listen to it again, maybe. I hope so anyway. At least it's thought-provoking. And let's look at chapter 17, verse 1. And it's entitled, Water from the Rock. Now, on chapter 20, we've got the same thing, only there's a little bit of entrance to a little bit of changing from one topic to another. And when we have these, now the people that believe that these started out as oral stories about people asking questions, couldn't even write yet. There was no writing system. So we're going to, as we read these, when the group of people is going to read it literally, and then we're going to look at another way. And I'm not going to say you have to believe one or the other, but I want to show you another way to read the Bible. And it might help us wonder, did Moses really get into that promised land, or did he not? Well, here we go. Let's look at the first verse in chapter 17 in Exodus. Get Exodus chapter 17 and Numbers chapter 20. And we're going to be in verse 1 in both of them. It says in chapter 17, from the wilderness of sin, the whole Israelite community journeyed by stages. Now, I want you to look at chapter 1 in chapter 40 in Numbers, verse 1, and listen, you're going to hear the same thing. The Israelites' whole community arrived at the wilderness of Zin. Same thing. Only one's arriving at Zin, one's not arriving at Zin. One is leaving Zin. And then this happens, it says, in the first month. So they've not been gone long from the slavery. In the first month, and the people stayed at Kadesh. It was here that Miriam died. Now, this is the first time you've heard of Miriam if you've been listening to these. Miriam was the sister of Moses and of Aaron. And here she dies. And here she was buried. Now we'll look at verse 2. This is where it starts getting interesting. Verse 2 says, the need for water at Kadesh. And the introduction in my Bible anyway is water from the rock. So there's water that's needed in both places. In verse 1 again, it says, from the wilderness of sin, the whole Israelite community journeyed. And this one says in chapter 20 of Numbers, the whole community arrived at the wilderness of sin. Now, what this is, according to what we call the documentary hypothesis, that these are different documents that were gathered up and put into our Bible to make it look like one story. Now, I think you already know, or at least you have heard anyway, there are two stories of the flood. There are two stories of creation. There are two stories of the Abrahamic covenant. Over and over and over, two stories. And there are going to be two stories of Moses getting water for his people. The first one is in chapter 17. According to the documentary hypothesis, that the person that wrote chapter 17 was a person that was not a priest, an Aaronite priest or a follower of Aaron in the temple in Jerusalem. This is just the story. That was the original story, was chapter 17. And then it says, but there was no water for the people to drink. That's it. Oh, in chapter 17. Put your finger on verse 2. There was no water to drink. Look now at verse 2 in 40. Since the community had no water, they held an assembly against Moses and Aaron. Since there was no water. Now, Aaron is the hero of the people in Jerusalem. That's where Aaron's descendants settled. And they're the Aaronite priests. And their hero is Aaron. But the hero at the beginning was Moses. So they're going to take this story in chapter 17. That's by the not the priests in Jerusalem. And these priests are going to change it to make it fit what they want. So as we read that first one, there was no water for the people to drink. And so they quarreled with Moses. In this first story, Aaron never appears. So whenever we see Aaron, we know that it's been changed, and it's written or changed by those priests in those nasty priests, those feisty priests in Jerusalem. So let's look back to chapter 20, verse 2 again. Since the community had no water, they held an assembly against Moses and Aaron. There was no Aaron in the first part. So back to number 2, verse 2 was, and they quarreled with Moses, no Aaron, and they said, give us water to drink. And Moses replied to them, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? This is just between God and Moses here. When verse 3 says, here then, in their thirst for water, the people grumbled against Moses, just Moses, saying, why then did you bring us up out of Egypt to have us die of thirst and our children and our livestock? Well, why'd you bring us up here? Well, look at verse 3 now. Still in Numbers, flip those Bibles back and forth. Verse 3 says, the people quarreled with Moses, exclaiming that we had perished when we just perished when our kindred before the Lord. Now, they're going to grumble. Aaron's going to be in there, but not when he gets grumbled against. When they grumble against him, it's just Moses. So verse 4 says, so Moses cried out to the Lord, what shall I do with the people? A little more and they will stone me. Now, back to verse 3 just a moment. Here then, in their thirst for water, the people grumbled against Moses, saying, then did you bring us out of Egypt to have us die of thirst with our children and our livestock? Now, one other thing is, when it says, Moses, you brought us out, that's not the people, the priests, because the priests want God to be doing everything, and they're going to say, when God brought you out. So there's little clues about different ones. Verse 4, so Moses cried out to the Lord, what shall I do with these people? A little more, and they will stone me. Look over to Numbers. We're going to be jumping back and forth. To Numbers chapter 20, verse 3. The people quarreled with Moses, exclaiming, would that we had perished when our kindred perished before the Lord. So we got them, they both are in chapter 40, in chapter 20 of Numbers. It's the same thing, saying the same thing, only Aaron comes in and out here, where there was no Aaron in the first one. The Lord answered Moses, go on ahead of the people and take along with you some of the elders of Israel, holding in your hand as you go the staff with which you struck the Nile. So he's going to go ahead of them. And he's going to get a group of people to go with him, and he's going to take his staff with him. Now, look at verse 4 and 20 in chapter 20 of Numbers. Why have you brought the Lord's assembly into the wilderness for us and our livestock to die there? So the livestock are going to die in both places, but with one it's going to be Aaron, and with one it's going to be Moses, and one it's going to be Aaron and Moses. Now we're almost finished with chapter 17 in Exodus. It says this, I will be standing there in front of you on the rock. So God and Moses are really close together. In chapter 33 or 34 of Exodus, God refers to him as his only close friend. I'm going to be standing on that rock with you, and strike the rock and the water will flow from it, and the people will drink. And Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. He did it with that group. And the place was named Massah and Meribah. It's going to be the same place as in chapter 17, as it's going to be Meribah in both of them. Because the Israelites quarreled there and tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord in our midst or not? Now, we're going to go to chapter 20 again, and we're going to stay there. Chapter 4, verse 4 says, why have you brought the Lord's assembly into the wilderness for us and our livestock to die? Same thing. Verse 5, why have you brought us up out of Egypt, only to bring us to this wretched place? It's not a place for grain, nor figs, nor vines, nor pomegranates, and there's no water to drink. It's all about water. Now in chapter 17, he's already brought the water, and he's the hero. He's not going to be the hero pretty soon. Verse 6, but Moses and Aaron. Now you got Aaron in there again. Sometimes you'll see Moses, and sometimes Moses and Aaron. It started out just Moses. But this writer is putting in Moses and Aaron. But Moses and Aaron went away from the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting, where they fell prostrate. Now back there it says they fell prostrate. But back in chapter 17, it was just Moses that was praying to God. But you got to get Aaron in there now. And here's the sin of Moses and Aaron. The title of this: Then the glory of the Lord appeared to them. When the glory of the Lord appears, it's when Aaron comes on the scene. He's going to have the glory of the Lord. Verse 7 says, And the Lord said to Moses, Take the staff and assemble the community, you and Aaron your brother. In their presence, command the rock to yield its waters. He doesn't say strike with the staff, but he says take the staff with you. He's not going to do anything with it, but it was back there in chapter 17, and he just decides to leave it in, or forgets it maybe. But he's going to take his staff, and that's going to be the downfall, according to these priests. Thereby you will bring water from the rock for them and supply the community and their livestock with water. And that's the same thing he did back in chapter 17 of Exodus. He brought water for the people and their livestock. Verse 9 says, So Moses took the staff from its place before the Lord as he was ordered. Now you notice here, God's not on the rock with Moses. The Aaronite priests do not want God there with Moses. Okay, let's look at verse 10 now. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly in front of the rock. Now it's two of them. Moses got it, but Aaron's in there with him. So this is the priest in Jerusalem that's writing this. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly in front of the rock, where he said to them, Just listen, you rebels. Are we to produce water for you out of this rock? You think we're going to do that? Well, he knows he is. Verse 11 says, Then raising his hand, Moses struck the rock twice. Now you see what they've put in there? He took his staff. God told Moses just to go talk to the rock. So he's going to change it just a little bit so that it's going to be Moses' fault. Verse 11 said, Then raising his hand, Moses struck the rock twice with his staff, and water came out in abundance, and the community and their livestock drank. Now, after they drank, here's what happens. Verse 12. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, he's talking to both of them now, but it's only Moses that's done something wrong. Because you did not have confidence in me to acknowledge my holiness before the Israelites, therefore you shall not lead this assembly into the land that I have given them. He says he's not going to live, they're not going to be able to take the people into the land because he hit the rock, maybe twice. Nobody knows it's just those people there, those priests, wanted to make Aaron bad. Because in that first one, remember, in chapter 17 in Exodus, there was nothing that said he doesn't get to go. Verse 13 says, These are the waters of Meribah. Now Meribah is the same place in chapter 17 as it is here in chapter 20 of Numbers. These are the waters of Meribah, where the Israelites quarreled with the Lord, and through which he displayed his holiness. That's the way he shows us that he's holy. He's going to tell them, you can't go. Now, in the priestly source later on, when they get time to go in, Moses and Aaron both die and are buried. There's no such thing going to happen like that with the source that was the original source that was not been doctored up. Now, I'm going to give you an assignment for next week. Write this down. Go to chapter 33 of Exodus and read verses 1 through 7. And then go to chapter 34 of Exodus and read verses 11 and 14. And see if that is not telling you, hey, Moses is going right into that promised land. Sure sounds like it. By the writer that's not from those priests in Jerusalem, because Moses is the hero everywhere else. But it just, now Jerusalem, they get the last shot at it. They're the ones, these priests that gather all these materials up. The 2 stories of the flood, all of them. And the priest then combines them, and he gets the last word. And in chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis, it's the priestly source comes first. It's always the priest that he puts them in the favorable place, or favorable for Aaron. Now, this is just the start in Exodus. We're going to see that those people, those priests in Jerusalem, they're going to work against Moses. And people's going to get a little bit of retaliation, because old Aaron, that's the highest one, the only one that can go into the tent of meeting. He's the only one that can be the high priest. In the very next chapter or 2, he makes a golden calf. And it all depends on who's doing the writing. God bless you. Have a beautiful day. And do your homework. Bye.